Tech Explainer right here on the YouTube channel. We've got some great visual effects lined up to break this down today, and hey, feel free to toggle on those English captions if you want to follow along closely. Look, if you're managing Linux systems or containerized cloud environments, you absolutely need to drop what you're doing and pay attention. We're looking at a critical, actively exploited root access bug that is literally sending shockwaves through the cybersecurity world right now. Today, we're dissecting the complete anatomy of an exploit known as copy fail. We'll uncover exactly how it works and, more importantly, what you need to do about it. But first, what's truly staggering about this vulnerability is the number 9. Yep, for 9 long years, this critical flaw sat completely undetected, just buried deep within the Linux kernel. It's a pretty stark reminder, honestly, that even the most heavily scrutinized, widely used open source code out there can harbor silent ticking time bombs, just waiting for the wrong person to find them. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap. We'll cover the copy fail vulnerability, how the exploit works, the threat to cloud containers, the anatomy of the attack, and finally, mitigation and patching. Kicking things off with Section 1, the copy fail vulnerability, officially known as CVE 2026-31431. Now, this bug carries a CVS as severity score of 7.8. And yeah, I know, 7.8 out of 10 might not sound like a full-blown hair-on-fire emergency, but do not let that fool you. CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, just added this exact vulnerability to their known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. Why? Because they have concrete evidence that threat actors are actively exploiting this in the wild, right now. So let's make sure we're on the same page about what we're dealing with. Copy fail is a local privilege escalation, or LPE, flaw. By definition, this means an attacker starts out as just a regular local user with restricted privileges and then exploits the flaw to gain full administrative root-level access to the system. Now, just to be super clear, this isn't a remote code execution bug on its own. The attacker does need some form of initial access, a basic foothold, before they can actually pull the trigger. What's really fascinating here is the timeline. It wasn't just one catastrophic coding mistake. Basically, between 2011 and 2017, developers introduced 3 separate, totally harmless-looking changes to the Linux kernel. But when combined over time, they inadvertently created a severe logic bug in the kernel's authentication cryptographic template. Fast forward to May 2026, CISA flags it for active exploitation, and now federal agencies are under a massive time crunch with a strict May 15th deadline to get this patched across their infrastructure. Moving right along to Section 2, how the exploit works. You guys, the efficiency of this exploit is honestly astounding. Security researchers at Thori and Shunt figured out that this complex logic bug can be reliably triggered by a tiny 732-byte Python script. Think about that for a second. Less than a single kilobyte of code is all it takes to completely corrupt the kernel's in-memory page cache. And this brilliantly illustrates what Wiz calls a ghost in the machine. The quote here spells it out perfectly. By modifying that page cache, which is basically the temporary in-memory version of a program, the attacker alters the binaries right when they run without ever leaving a single trace on the physical hard drive. It's wild. They can inject malicious code into highly privileged binaries, like the su command, completely under the radar. Which brings us to Section 3, the threat to cloud containers. If you're a cloud engineer, your alarm bells should be ringing off the hook right now. Let's compare the environments. On a traditional host machine, an attacker has to get local user access to that physical server. But in a containerized environment, we're talking Docker, LXC, Kubernetes, the dynamic changes completely. By default, these environments grant processes access to the AFFLG subsystem in the host kernel. And guess what? That is exactly where this vulnerability lives. Your containers are effectively exposed right out of the box. Listen to this stark warning from Kaspersky. They note that copy fail poses a risk of breaching container isolation and actually gaining control over the physical machine. This is the absolute nightmare scenario for modern cloud architecture, guys. They aren't just compromising a single container sandbox. They're using this tiny script to smash right through the container walls and hijack the underlying physical host machine, along with potentially everything else running on it. To make matters worse, detection is incredibly difficult. Why? Because the exploit doesn't rely on noisy techniques like memory address guessing or race conditions that usually trip your security alarms. It uses entirely legitimate system calls. To your monitoring tools, this catastrophic attack blends in perfectly with just normal, everyday application behavior. Let's move to Section 4, Anatomy of the Attack. Let's walk through the 5-step attack path documented by Microsoft's Defender Security Research Team. It's pretty slick. Step 1, reconnaissance. The attacker scopes out the environment to make sure it's running a vulnerable kernel. Step 2, they prep that microscopic Python trigger we just talked about. Step 3, they execute it from a low-privilege context, like a compromised basic user account. Step 4 is the surgical strike, a highly controlled 4-byte overwrite right in the kernel's page cache. And finally, Step 5, that tiny little corruption lets the attacker's process seamlessly escalate to user ID 0, meaning full unrestricted root privileges. Now again, you can't just launch this remotely over the open internet by itself. But when you chain it, it's devastating. If an attacker gets even the most basic initial foothold, say a leaked SSH password, a malicious CI job, or a vulnerable web app inside a container, they can instantly chain it with copy-fail to completely take over the entire system. Finally, Section 5, mitigation and patching. Sysadmins, here is your playbook. First off, obviously, apply the official patches. Fixes are already out for impacted Linux distributions, targeting kernel versions 6.18.2, 6.19.12, and 7.0. Go check your versions right now. But if you literally cannot patch today because of operational constraints, you've got to implement workarounds immediately. That means disabling the affected cryptographic feature entirely, setting up strict network isolation, and heavily locking down your access controls to stop that initial foothold from happening in the first place. Because here's the reality check. Proof of concept exploits aren't just theoretical research anymore. Fully working versions of copy-fail, written in Python, Go, and Rust, are already circulating freely on open source repos. The tools are out there, the barrier to entry is ridiculously low, and threat actors are actively using them. So I leave you with this. Is your container infrastructure patched today? Or are you leaving the keys to the kingdom sitting right there in the page cache? You might want to go check your systems. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and stay secure out there.